Hello and welcome to Recovery Weekly, an interactive weekly program used to guide you, the family member of an individual with a substance abuse problem, through the process of recovery. I'm your host, Scott Kalane, joined as always by my co-host, Ian Koch. Ian is a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, as well as an internationally certified addiction specialist with NortheastAddictionConsultants.com. Thanks for joining me today, Ian.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Our guest for today is Dr. Carol Clark, who's a board-certified sex therapist and addictions counselor. President and senior instructor at the Sex Therapy Training Institute, is an adjunct professor at Carlos Abizu University in Miami, Florida. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Clark.
Good morning.
Now, I just wanted to mention before we started the show that this is an internet show and that could have a glitch from time to time, and just to bear that in mind if anything happens, like one of the video goes down. Stay tuned and we'll probably get it up in no time at all. And this is also an interactive show, so if you have any questions for Ian or Dr. Clark, feel free to enter them into the chat box to the right of the screen, and we'll field them as quickly as possible. So Dr. Clark, what was it that propelled you towards a career as a sex therapist?
Yeah. I went back to school when I was in my 30s. I finally decided what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I worked really hard through my 30s to go through undergrad and finish a master's degree in counseling because I wanted to be a counselor. And then I came to Florida. And to get licensed, I had to take a human sexuality course. And I took it with an amazing, amazing woman named Dr. Marilyn Volker, who became my good friend and mentor. And she opened up a world to me of sex therapy. And she'd bring in panels of people, gay and lesbian, bisexual people, disabled people, transgender people. The way she teaches was just so inspiring that I thought this is the direction I want to go in. And I'd also decided I didn't want to go for a psychology degree and go for a doctorate in psychology. That would have been just too much by that time. I was getting old. I wanted to get on with my career. So I thought, well, let me get a specialty. And in Florida, actually, the title of sex therapist is a protected title. So you have to have continuing education, but not like for a clinical psych degree. So I went ahead and had the opportunity to take the additional training, and then the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality out in San Francisco made an agreement with the professor that was teaching the sex therapy courses that, okay, just take a little bit more and do a little bit more work and do your dissertation, then you can get a doctorate in sex therapy. So I went ahead and did that. So my doctorate is actually in sex therapy.
Okay.
And that's how I became a sex therapist.
In a nutshell, right?
In a nutshell.
Now, you've recently written a book called Addict America, The Lost Connection, and it focuses on not only our typical addictions that we see as Americans, but basically anything that can be turned into an addiction, even if it's internet use or pornography, or just to the extent I think you take it is what causes it to become an addiction. How are these things now, like cell phones, pornography, gambling, how are they replacing actual human interaction for Americans?
So what I discovered is I got certified in addictions. Then I was working with sex offenders. And in just a few, I'm not saying all sex offenders are sex addicts, by no means, but a few of the sex offenders turned out to be sex addicts. And so I got into that. I went into that direction, combining the sex therapy and addictions. And then I eventually really expanded my private practice. I was seeing a lot of couples. I was seeing a lot of sex addicts. And I was seeing just regular couples that were having problems with sexuality. And I realized that over the years, we're talking years here, that I'm teaching the same thing to people in counseling. I'm counseling them for the same issues, which is a lack of connection. Addiction is a barrier to intimacy. And there's a real lack of connection here. And it's all caused by the same thing, that, and it seems to be particular for Americans, that just our basic Americanism, that go for it and bigger, everything has to be bigger and bigger and better, and, you know, as big as Texas and as big as a big gulp, and, you know, everything has to be more and more and more. And that constant striving to get more was creating this addictive lifestyle, because everything is focused on what's next and how can I get more, and filling a hole. And you know, what that hole is about is the starting out in childhood. You know, I also do EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a way of using bilateral brain stimulation, either from eye movements, make your eyes go back and forth, or music, or some kind of tactile tapping. In short, it's a way to cut through talk therapy and get right to the limbic system, the memory system in the brain, and process old traumas is what we're doing. And the old traumas are not just from abuse, like people think, but they're from the pain of not being enough. When I can't tell you how many people I talked to when they were kids, they'd come home, they get straight A's on their report card, time after time, then they get a B, and they never got rewarded for the A's. But when they get that B, they get slammed. Like, why didn't you get an A? Basically, the kid takes in the idea that, well, nothing I do is ever going to be good enough. I'm not good enough. And now they've got this hole they're walking around with. And those are the kinds of traumas that lead people to do more and more, to get more and more, to try and be enough. And but yet, at the same time, there's that fear that, wow, if people see, I have to keep people at a distance, because if they see that how I'm really not good enough, then they're not going to want to be with me. So I'm not really lovable. And, you know, we fill that hole of not being good enough and of not really being connected and intimate with other people. We fill that with stuff and with getting more, with trying to be successful through having more and more stuff, and through, and in the case of sex addiction, it's through having more and more sexual behavior that's not only, you know, filling a hole in the moment, but it's provides pseudo intimate relationships. So I can pretend, I can think, you know, oh yeah, I have a lot of relationships, or I'm connecting with people, but it really is through a controlled way. And all of this changes the brain, because we get dopamine released from stimulation. Our brains were constantly taking in stimulation. In a normal sense, that stimulation just provides little bumps off our baseline. But when we do things that are exceptionally stimulating, we get giant peaks. And we get that from artificially enhancing something, whether it's sex or internet porn. The internet's a great example, because, you know, you used to have to read a magazine and look at pictures. Now you just click, 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 click. And so we've artificially enhanced that stimulation. We've made crack out of coca leaves. We've, you know, all these things. So we change our brains, because we start getting this kind of high, and our caveman brain, what I call the caveman brain, that baseline says, oh, no, 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 I've been this way 5 million years. Don't mess with me. So in its attempt to maintain things, you know, this kind of blip, when you have this, it has to raise the baseline. So then we get this. But we want more stimulation. We remember how good this feels, and we remember the relief of pain we feel when we're getting this kind of stimulation. So then we have to go after more. You can't get enough. When you start raising that baseline, you can't get enough from any one thing. So you're going to go to everything. You're going to get stimulation from sex, from food, from work, from creating drama, from running late all the time, and, you know, creating all this chaos. and you know, fighting with your partner, and just everything that feeds that insatiable need for stimulation, then that life is out of control. And so the bottom line is addiction is obsessive, compulsive, out of control behavior done in spite of negative consequences to self and others. Anything that fits into that, any behavior that, so I'm not demonizing any behavior. I'm not saying anything is wrong unless it's, you know, illegal or harming somebody. But, you know, anything that people do, that's fine unless it becomes obsessive, compulsive, out of control behavior done in spite of negative consequences to self and others.
You know what's really interesting? You were saying about, and you might have to rephrase what I'm about to say, but something to do with the sex addiction and the inability to have intimate relationships, right? Mm-hmm. So what I've seen fairly recently is some sex addicts are not necessarily engaging in physical intimacy, but they're mm-hmm. finding these relationships through Facebook with mm-hmm. people who are, you know, all over the country. They never actually see each other, but they have these very interesting, we'll say, intimate relationships with people who they never see, they never meet, they never intend on necessarily meeting or getting together with. But then there's all these drama, and she said, and she posted, and I didn't like her comment, and why, you know, and it's really, really interesting to watch how, you know, it's feeding, like, as a culture, as we grow and we move into technology, the addiction is manifesting in other ways and starting to develop other ways. And mm-hmm. I wanted to mention that I spent some time out of the country in some areas where there's a lot of partying, or there can be a lot of partying. And I always noticed that if you would see a group of 5 people and 3 of them were really, really hammered, really drunk, it was the Americans that were really drunk. The folks from France, Australia, Canada, the locals, whatever the country was, they were never that drunk. I mean, they might have a couple cocktails and get a little tipsy, but mm-hmm. you know, what I found in being in those areas is that, you know, someone from France might say, hey, you want to go have a couple drinks, and mm-hmm. mean a couple as in 2 drinks, where an American says you want to go have a couple drinks, and they're referring usually a couple bottles of wine, you know, a lot of drinks. They're intending on getting drunk where other people aren't. And it's really interesting how, from like a really early age, our society ingrains more is better, more is better. It starts, you know, when we walk into Toys R Us as a little kid, and there's not one G.I. Joe or one Barbie, there's 100. And I have to have all of them, you know, because my friends won't like me if I don't have all of them, you know. And, it really, really is interesting the way addiction spreads, and looking at it as a cultural piece. There's a Suma kid. She wrote a book called, I forgot. When the Heart Waits. And at one point...
When what? I'm sorry, you broke up.
When the Heart Waits. And at one point in the book, she talks about she's standing in line at the bank, and she's waiting to do a deposit. And she looks in line, and every single person in line is staring at their cell phone. Some people just can't over, you know, to just make sure it's a call that they just checked 3 minutes ago. Whether it's being on the internet, but, you know, as a society, we really are. We're losing the inability to sit still, you know, be quiet.
Oh, I lost that a long time ago. Sure.
Would you say?
Sure. I mean, there are all these studies about kids are sleeping with their cell phones under their pillows and are just waking up, you know, several times a night to tweet and text. And
would you find that Carol, to be the most prevalent, or maybe even the most like effective to the youth and the adults, and everyone who has a cell phone has now become consumed by it. So would you see that that's the most acceptable, but yet perhaps the most influential addiction that is now faced these days?
I don't want to. I mean, almost your question is almost a gets into which one is better, which one's more, which one's, it's a new manifestation of a way that we're all going after that stimulation. And what it's really about is our need to connect. I talk in my book about the two parts of the brain. We have our limbic system, the caveman brain, and we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking, reasoning part of the brain I call the enlightened brain. And that's where our spiritual, our ability to think in spiritual terms comes from. And we have this need to connect to each other. We are social beings. We're like bees or something. We need to connect. And we want to connect, and we want to connect not just with each other in pair bondings, but with our groups, with our families, with our communities, with our religions, with our country. We're Americans. And then we have a need to connect with a higher power, whatever that is, but connect with something greater than ourselves. And so, but that fear of connection, that fear of not being good enough, of being a failure, of being excluded from the group, keeps us constantly juggling in trying to be connected and yet trying to control how close, so that maintaining the control, true connection, true giving up to intimacy is about opening up completely without fear. And addiction is all about fear. And so trying to maintain that control to protect oneself. And so that happens. And we, of course, with the cell phones and all that, I mean, we see that fear from adolescence, that I'm not going to be accepted. Adolescence is a time of discovering one's identity apart from one's family, parents. So the ability to connect in a very controlled way and protect oneself, I think, leads to an intensified use of, cell phones.
I've always found it very interesting that social networks like Facebook and Twitter allow these privacy features for people that put out their tweets and their statuses and everything. I think it's kind of a counter to what they originally intended, was this global social network where everyone could interact and share ideas and opinions, and now it's become like a very cliquey, this is my controlled microcosm I have online. And I don't think that's the best thing that could be happening for our minds to expand.
Well, it's not, and it's also, it feeds into levels of codependency that are out of control right now. The way families follow their kids' tweet feed, and they follow their kids' Facebook to keep tabs of what they're doing. Parents today is where, like in a lot of the work that we do with Northeast Addiction Consultants, is we really try to help families take a step back, really stop the addiction versus enabling, where, mom is so used to nowadays knowing what time Jimmy is going to Algebra 1 class, what time he's then going. We're talking a 21-year-old college. We're not talking about a 14-year-old in high school. Texting back and forth, mom all day long, to make sure things are okay. Jimmy doesn't know how to pay bills. He doesn't know how to make appointments because mom does it for him. And then Mom, you know, I had a mother call me earlier this week, and she said to me, you know, what do you offer? And I explained our services, and she said, oh, we don't need that. We know how to stop the addiction. Really? We've been dealing with it in our family for years. Now I feel like I'm personally attacked. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about, so my ego kind of kicks in. And I said, oh, so how long have the folks been sober? And she's like, oh, well, no one's sober, but they've been in and out of treatment. You know, and I just stopped the conversation because she, you know, what families, and I think I wrote a blog about this this week, where families think that because they've experienced the devastating piece of addiction, they understand addiction. Because they understand that their kid steals from them, or that their husband doesn't come home when he's supposed to, or whatever it may be. They all of a sudden think that they're the authority on addiction and how to stop it. Yet recovery rates are still looking like 6% of the people getting sober make 5 years. So families need to be able to acknowledge that, you know, mom and dad are not the end all. And just because you're following a Facebook post doesn't mean you necessarily are able to help your child. And that's where, you know, going to professionals is so important for people. Mm-hmm. The separated objective, you know, to really get in there and help, you know.
It's true.
So what you're saying is that families seem to understand addiction and the addictive, some of the addictive process, certainly the addictive behaviors. What they're not understanding is recovery.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the part of addiction that they understand is.
Hold on 1 second, Ian.
Yeah.
Can you? Do you have your headset on you?
No.
Okay. It's just an echo from somewhere going through. Is it your?
I don't know if I can put a headset
on. Too loud, or?
Basically, I guess I was saying that I lost my train of thought.
Sorry about that. Sorry, but go ahead. So basically, she was mentioning about them understanding the addiction part, but not the recovery part. And you were saying,
yes, and they understand the trouble that addiction causes, but that's about it. You know, they don't necessarily know why it's happening. They don't know how to stop it, but they think because they've experienced the problem that they're into that help, and they can't.
Mm. Well, they're trying to, you know, and a lot of it is that whole control thing, and control is very paradoxical. You know, as we know from the Serenity Prayer, you know, it's what can we control, what can't we control, and how do we tell the difference? So people are we're always trying to control everything, and but when we're, you know, I look at it as external versus internal locus of control. Where's the control located? If I'm trying to control external things if I'm trying to manipulate external things to control what's inside my head, then it's never going to work. I'm never going to be successful because I have no control over those things, and it's never going to be enough. You know, if taking drugs, you know, doing sex, whatever, gambling, and just creating drama to try to relieve what's going on in my head, but it doesn't really get to the basis of what's driving the addiction. And families are doing that too. And when you have that whole addictive system, that everyone in the family is part of the system, and nobody's responsible for anybody else's behavior. We're not saying that ever. It's everyone's responsible for themselves, but that means being responsible for themselves and not trying to control all the other people in the system. Everybody needs to. So again, it's a paradox. There's so many paradoxes in addiction and recovery, and that paradox of having to get boundaries in order to then be open to connection, rather than being all enmeshed and, you know, trying to control each other, which actually keeps you disconnected, keeps you not looking at yourself. You're so busy creating the drama outside yourself, and that becomes addictive as well. So everybody's involved in that addictive thinking cycle. When I'm trying to do something, when I create a lot of drama and stimulation, it's feeding my addictive brain. And I can fool myself and do it under the guise of, well, I'm just trying to help you, but I'm trying to do this and that. And you know, if you would just...
if you would just go to treatment, we would be okay.
Sure, but you know, the family, if the family doesn't really get how the system is integrated, then the person going to treat, everybody has their roles,
yep,
of course. So then if someone stops doing their role and the rest of the family isn't willing to change their roles, then of course there's that pressure to keep the person. There's another paradox. I want you to get better, but I need you to stay sick.
Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties on our end. Ian, what were we discussing right before we went off the air? He's like, are you muted?
No, yeah, no idea.
No idea. Carol?
So I don't know where we left off,
okay,
because we continued to talk a little bit afterwards. So what we were talking about, you know, just a moment ago, was this idea that, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. All these ideas about our behavior and lack of connection and spirituality and the collective unconscious from Jungian psychology, and all these ideas of every major religion, every major culture, it's all about that connection, belonging to a group and connecting to a higher power. And so throughout all history, there's just, it keeps getting recycled, the message. And so I look at my book as a way of, you know, just presenting old ideas in a different way, in a way that some people can hear. I write it very conversationally. I keep it's short. I don't beat people over the head with any ideas. It's meant to be reread so that you kind of get things and then can go back to it. I basically wrote a book that I would read myself.
Oh, that's good.
So in today's world, when it's rush, 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 the different perspective that I think, you know, the one different thing I bring to it is this idea of addiction, that now we know how the addictive brain works, you know, with the baseline and the dopamine and the stimulation, and there's that process going on, and it's not that we're hardwired into, it's not a programming, but it's, you know, our caveman brain, like I said, is about 5 million years old. It's been chugging along just fine. Our prefrontal cortex is only about 150,000 years old. And so the way they interact is really interesting, because a lot of what the caveman brain is doing, the enlightened brain isn't so enlightened about it. And the way I present these concepts is a way to become more enlightened about what's going on in the caveman brain with the baseline and the dopamine, and so that we can make decisions. Because, you know, if you ever think about trying to make a decision when you're impaired, when you're drunk, you know, oh yeah, I can drive. And you can't. You think you can at the time because you're impaired. The next day, you say, oh my God, I never should have been driving. So we have that ability. And however, you know, if we're alcoholics, then we're going to drink again. If we're not, then we can make better decisions. So that addictive piece, that loss of control, applies to everything, goes way beyond alcoholism, and it applies to all these behaviors where you're just not present to even make the decisions to be in recovery. But that's what we're looking at. It's not necessarily, I know I'm bouncing around a lot with these ideas. And so
no, it's fine.
you know, we get impaired from our addictive thinking. And by the way, an addict is always high. So when people are saying, why can't you just decide? You know, why don't you just stop? Well, it's because you're always high. You're thinking about it, you're anticipating it, you're doing it, you're thinking about doing it again, you're recovering from, you know, you're never in a place of being present and clear-headed, which is why involuntary treatment can work. That's why we do interventions. That's why when people are forced to go into rehab and get their brains cleared out, then at the end of 30 days, give or take, they can that's like waking up in the morning and saying, oh my God, I have been so out of it. I've been in this cloud. So, you know, to kind of put that all together, we have these two parts of our brain that we're trying to integrate and make good decisions and understand what's going on in the more hidden part of the brain so that we can make a decision to live in recovery, to make every decision in our lives say, is this for my addiction or is this for my recovery?
Right.
And any part of that was fuzzy, ask me.
And do you think that a lot of these kids coming up now, that people are labeling as having ADD and ADHD might just be addicts in the making, the way they're treating their video games and television, that is
sure.
Really that they just don't have the ability to level out, you know, and be on like a cool, even plane.
Sure, it's just go, 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 and raising that baseline from a very young age. You know, and that's the thing. Technology is always ahead of the research. We have no idea, you know, what all this stuff. I still worry about microwaves. I worry about everything wireless. I mean, how do we know? You know, we got all these things going around. We don't know. You know, we jump into things, and that's another certainly American addictive way of thinking. You know, it keeps us revved up when we're always reactionary. We as a country are so reactionary. It's anytime we try to put out some idea that's proactive, it's like, let's look ahead and anticipate where the problems could be and address them on the front end. No, Americans don't want anything to do with that. They don't want to put their tax money towards it. They don't want to put their energy towards it. No, it's all gut reaction. And that's addicted. That's addiction. It keeps us revved up. It keeps us with that instant gratification rather than put money into, you know, preventive programs to help education. Look at education. We cut education programs and we fund prisons. I mean, how insane is that? We know that prisons are going to cost us, what, 10 times more than a prevention program.
It's like,
for one person. And yet, rather than do it proactive, because where do we get the instant gratification? We get it when we can nail that guy and send him to prison. We don't get it on the front end with, okay, here's this kid that needs to get a good education to contribute to the tax base and have a good job and contribute to society. No, that's not particularly rewarding to us as Americans.
Yeah.
We rather wait till that kid goes out and, you know, starts doing armed burglaries and robberies and ends up in prison, and then we have a sense of, oh yeah, look what we did.
And I actually hear people talk about when they watch these are some people I've come in contact with, they've watched shows like Intervention and have actually fast forwarded through the intervention part because they're like, there's no juice there, there's no fun, like, oh, they're actually getting help now. And sad.
So that's addiction. That's addictive thinking. It's like, give me the stimulation, give me the excitement. So we're training our brains so quickly to need extra excitement. And I say to every addict who says, well, oh, it just happened. I just happened to be there and it just happened. No. What did you do to cause this to happen? And when I'm working with a couple and they're like, well, we had this fight, you know, and oh, I just got so mad at him. And okay, what did you do to cause it? Because it's a circular process. It's not linear. It's not, okay, this happened, and so I acted out, whatever. No, it's not. Everyone creates those circumstances that allows them to act out. And, you know, it just
keeps going.
spirals out of control.
It's really, it's absolutely snowballs. This is exactly like our conversation with Mike Hoffman I think it was 2 shows ago, you know, and there are some providers out there that are really all on the same page with, you know, this addiction is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, what we talked about a couple weeks ago is that, you know, some of the programs out there are starting to feed other addictions where, you know, they extended care programs that give out free gym memberships, you know, and then you have guys, maybe we talked about this with Callie last week, but then you have guys who have eating disorders that nobody knows about because it's a guy, you know, but he needs bigger muscles and he's eating throughout the day are protein shakes and chicken with no carbs, and he's got to look good, and, you know, but he's in recovery, you know, he's sober, you know, but then he goes and he spends 3 hours a day at the gym.
Yeah.
And like will not dare to eat an Oreo cookie because, you know, he might gain weight. And if he doesn't go to the gym, I mean, I can't tell you how many guys in early recovery I have worked with that have been going to the gym neurotically, and if they don't go to the gym one day, they feel like they're going to gain weight. And
sure.
A, that's an eating disorder. B, that's an addiction. C, it's not healthy. But here they are at a rehab, extended care or treatment program to get well. You know, where, yes, they're getting off the drugs and alcohol, but now because they're not really doing treatment, they're not getting real therapy or deep work internally in the soul, the addiction now manifests into something else that the ego can grab hold of and take on and become neurotic with.
So the words you're using are really important, and you know, you're saying an addiction. Okay, that's an addiction. That's an addiction. And what I'm trying to make a shift to is this idea of it's addiction. It's addictive thinking, behavior, cycles. So, and even I'm trying to figure out how to move away from the idea that any person is an addict. They're engaging in addictive, you know, so it keeps it simple. You know, say, okay, hi, I'm an addict. But it's not about any particular addiction. It's all addictive. It's all addiction thinking. Because if we look at it, then we're, you know, playing whack-a-mole. You know, okay, put out the alcohol, okay, and up pops the, you know, gym. Okay, whack that one, and up pop.
Hello?
Carol.
Now I see. I got it.
Oh.
Is that right? Okay. This is what we talked about in the beginning. We're like, just stick with us, folks. We'll get it all figured out.
Can you hear me without the video?
Yeah,
yes, it's just fine.
Okay. So,
coming up now.
Oh my! On my end, I see 2 of me. Isn't that cute?
Oh,
I was like, oh my goodness! All this technology that we become addicted.
We'll wrap it in a second. So go ahead.
Yeah. So just and that's a problem with a lot of treatment programs is they still look at it like, well, we treat drugs and alcohol, and I think that's insurance driven because.
It is. Who's paying? Where's the money?
But you know, programs need to treat everything. They need to treat addiction, addictive thinking and behavior, because you're either in addiction or you're in recovery.
That's true. Well, we want to thank you for coming on the show today, Dr. Clark. It's great to have you on here. Now, how can anyone interested in your services get in contact with you?
Yeah, I have 3 my main website is my drcarolclark.com. That's drcarolclark.com. And you can access everything about me from that website. I do counseling. I do phone counseling. I do Skype counseling with people actually around the world. I don't do deep therapy with people who aren't present, but I do a lot of counseling. I'm located in the Miami area. And you can also access the book from the links on the website. I have a YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Dr. Carol Clark. And there's a lot of videos. There's a lot of short videos there that I've done over the years about addiction, about all kinds of things. So you can access those. The book has its own website, addictamerica.net. And it's a really cool book, and it's cheap, and it's helpful for everybody. It's helpful for the general public. It's helpful for people in recovery. It's helpful for therapists. I train a lot of therapists in addictions and sex therapy, so if anyone's interested in that. Again, you can access those things, those websites from drcarolclark.com. And so if anyone out there wants to be an addictions professional or a sex therapist, look me up there. And yeah, what I teach in the book, the idea is the conceptualization has helped even experienced clinicians take a new approach with everyone. It's all about everyone who comes to see us. It's about they're experiencing a lack of intimacy and connection in their lives. And so to conceptualize where that comes from, what's going on in the brain, to apply a recovery model to all relationships, it works. There's people out there who want to argue with me, whatever. It works. So
great. Thank you very much.
I mean, it does. So.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for having me on and for the good work you do.
Thank you.
Thanks. And if you need help getting your loved one on the path to recovery, please call 1-800-723-1073 for a free consultation, or visit northeastaddictionconsultants.com. Be sure to tune in next week when we have Gene Campbell, who specializes in psychodrama, a form of psychotherapy in which patients act out events from their past. And from us here at Northeast Addiction Consultants, we wish you and your family a safe journey to recovery.